the worst Apple products of the last decade, and how to work around them. I'm iCave Dave and I simplify Apple so that everything just works for you, and every weekday I bring you the latest Apple news, leaks and rumours, but this video is slightly different because nothing interesting happened yesterday. So we are talking about the worst 5 Apple products of the last decade. Let's just get into it.
Number 1, Apple Mouse. All of them, really.
Not any particular one, they're all pretty bad. I can't work out why Apple doesn't quite get how to make a mouse. Head over to Amazon and you will find hundreds, thousands even of mice that may not be fancy, but they get the job done. Apple seems to have a bit of an innovation syndrome here, and they can't help themselves but try to change something that already works pretty well. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, or the scroll wheel. Apple was the company that first popularised the mouse way back with the Macintosh. It was one of the first computers that featured a GUI, or graphical user interface, and the idea wasn't theirs, but it came from Xerox when Apple's team visited Xerox PARC, but Apple were the ones that then brought it to the masses and made computers simple to use, even to the extent that the first Macintosh keyboard didn't include arrow keys in order to force developers to write with the mouse in mind. That mouse had just a single button, and this would come to haunt Apple in the future. Now we're focusing on the last decade, but mistakes happened all the way through from the 1998 Apple USB mouse, or hockey puck, and this was an example of making the most beautiful mouse ever and forgetting function altogether. Bundled with the early iMacs, this thing is round and matched the iMac's vivid colours, but because it was round when you put your hand on it without looking, you'd start moving it and your cursor would go off in a weird direction because it wouldn't be lined up with your hand. Very frustrating. And Apple still doesn't know how to get something to go the right way around in your hand because the Apple TV remote feels exactly the same upside down. Apple then moved to the more traditional Pro mouse in black and white, which still only had a single click and no scrolling in the year 2000, and then they made this white and wireless in 2003, still with just one click and no scrolling. But they did innovate massively in 2005 with the Mighty Mouse, which also had a pretty epic name. I like that one. This had left and right click through capacitive sensors, a squeeze sensor and a trackball on top instead of a scroll wheel, allowing you to scroll side to side too, which is great. Although it did have the one problem that old mice always used to have when they had a ball in the bottom: it clogged up with dirt, and it wasn't easy to clean out. In 2006, Apple offered this same Mighty Mouse without a wire. Now Apple's Magic Mouse is a loved and hated device that arrived around 2009 with the pure scrollable multi-touch top surface, and it was pretty good, only to be ruined when the Magic Mouse 2 came out with the unforgivable lightning charging port in the bottom, so it couldn't be charged and used at the same time, or used wired, but it was just lying on its back like a stranded turtle, or awkwardly on its side when you charged it. Give this thing wireless charging, maybe through MagSafe in a future version, and most people will be happy, but it would be lovely if you could click those buttons individually. The easy solution, however, is if you're going to Mac, then Mac using a trackpad. Apple is 100% the undisputed king here, whether it's on MacBooks or the standalone Magic trackpads. It is the way to work, because you have full access to all of the gestures, Launchpad, Expose or Mission Control, multiple desktops, and even Force Touch. Is it good for gaming? Absolutely not. But, as Intel has taught us all, we don't need to buy a Mac for gaming. They have super thin Ultrabooks for that.
Number 2, the Touch Bar.
Now, I hate to say this because I love the concept of the Touch Bar, but Apple didn't do a great job with it. Putting in Touch ID, a great move. Customizable controls, a great move. Being able to slide or control your volume, a great move. But not being able to hit volume buttons without looking, or not having a physical escape key in the early versions, they weren't so great. Now, we're hearing that the Touch Bar may be about to say goodbye with physical keys set to return, but Apple does have patents for individual keycaps that could be customizable with OLED displays to put on there whatever you want. And while the patent talks about the whole keyboard having this, so you'd be able to localize the key layout to different languages easily, it could also come to the function row alone first to prove the concept, possibly coming to the whole keyboard later down the line. Think Elgato Stream Deck with buttons across the whole keyboard. And on that topic, if you've ever wanted to try out one of those macro pads for your setup, whether it's for video editing, gaming, photos, or streaming, you should definitely check out Tech Moon's brilliant video on repurposing either an old iPhone or using your iPad for this instead.
Number 3, Apple's Webcams.
In a surprise to nobody that's owned a fairly recent Mac, Apple's FaceTime cameras in Macs have pretty much sucked for a while now. The 2015 12-inch MacBook came with a 480p potato where the camera should have been, and even Apple's MacBook Pro line and every iMac until recently came with 720p cameras, only reaching the dizzying heights of 1080p with the iMac Pro. Apple has made those same sensors look miles better in the new M1 MacBooks Air and Pro, simply because the silicon they use in the M1 SoC contains much better image signal processors, but the tiny sensors in a thin chassis can only do so much with the light they gather. Even though everyone complains about Apple's webcams, there are not many thin and light laptops on the market that actually do any better. Even if they claim 1080p, the limitation comes from the depth of the laptop's lid. While we're expecting Apple to redesign these MacBooks this year, 2021 if you happen to be watching in the future, and if you are, do we have hoverboards yet? These redesigns will likely feature a slightly thicker lid, allowing for better sensors and possibly even FaceTime coming to these MacBooks eventually, though these probably still won't rival even the FaceTime camera in your iPhone, as there won't be much depth to work with. Happily though, there are a number of apps that you can use to make use of the comparatively, and let's face it, objectively awesome cameras in your iPhone as a webcam for your Mac, which I looked into a lot when I got my Mac Mini, as that doesn't even have a webcam to put up with. Iriun Cam is one that I use, link in the description.
Number 4. HomePods and Siri. Hey wait, what are you trying to say?
Just like the mouse, Apple was one of the first companies to bring voice assistants to their devices. Siri was originally a standalone that was destined for iOS and Android before Apple bought the company to integrate its functions into the iPhone 4S. Since then, Siri has spread her wings and now lives in your Apple TV remote, Apple Watch, HomePods, Mac, and even your AirPods, reading your text messages to you. And Siri definitely gets a hard time, mainly because Apple's views on privacy have hobbled how much Siri can know about your stuff, compared to OK Google and Alexa, order me some toothpaste. Sorry if I triggered your stuff. HomePod is of course an absolute beast in the audio department, or at least it was until it went the way of the iMac Pro and got sliced from Apple's lineup in 2021. And a big reason for its failing was Siri. As much as Siri could hear you whisper her name from across the room while blasting uncomfortably loud music at you, Siri hiding inside struggled to answer a lot of the questions that Google Home and Amazon's assistants did without issue, and making it really hard to use other streaming services other than Apple's own, or even giving you the option of jack connector or regular Bluetooth for playing other music made it a really short-lived product.
Nope, not playing anymore, I'm hurt. Fine. Number 5. MacBooks from 2015 to 2019, all of them.
Now this is one of those times when Apple isn't 100% to blame, but they definitely take some of it. We've already talked about the sucky webcams, which is definitely their fault, and resulted from their need to make things thinner and lighter at the cost of all else. This also led to the notorious butterfly keyboards that started with the massively underpowered MacBook 12-inch, and then crept its way out to MacBook Pros and even MacBook Airs, only to be replaced again with Magic Keyboards in 2020. MacBook Pro models also had massive issues with thermal throttling, meaning that much of the power that you were buying was left on the table whenever you tried to do something demanding, which is sort of the point of having that power in the first place, is doing demanding things. And this is where Apple's blame starts to fade away a little bit, because for the MacBook Pros, MacBook 12-inch, and even the later MacBook Airs, it came down to Intel. Apple had designed their enclosures based on what Intel had promised would be coming down the line on their roadmap, but then Intel started to fail at making the progress they were expecting. As a result, to get the performance gains they needed, Intel's chips had to use more energy, and that energy has to go somewhere in the form of heat, which the chassis was never built to handle. Because Apple doesn't use cheap plastic casings that can be replaced quickly, the unibody aluminium MacBooks took a lot more development to change the thermals. So Apple had to push forward with the Macs that couldn't perform as well as they should have done. Now they could have gone with more aggressive fan curves, but as a company they've always hated noisy computers. Just look at the G4 Cube that was fanless and released back in 2002. But something amazing happened as a result of Intel's failures here. Apple was pushed to keep developing their own A-series chips that were making iPads and iPhones rapidly catch up with and overtake a lot of laptop chips. And in 2020, Apple's WWDC announced their switch to Apple Silicon over the coming 2 years. In November, we got our first taste of what M1 can do, pretty much destroying anything else in a laptop at their first attempt in benchmarks, real-world computing testing, and battery life. All of this still in those thin and light enclosures, and in the case of the MacBook Air, completely taking away the fan. In the case of the Mac Mini, reducing the price versus the Intel model that it replaced, and performing better than even the high-end Intel models still in the line. And this is only the beginning. Soon Apple Silicon will come to the iMac, higher-end MacBook Pros. Again, the M1 outperforms all of the existing MacBook Pros in most tasks, while being the cheapest and having the best battery life. And when the Mac Pro finally goes to Apple Silicon 2, there will likely be nothing in the desktop market that comes close either. Believe me, we did the numbers, and you can see it up here. So those are the worst 5 Apple products of the past decade. Let me know why I'm wrong down in the comments, and subscribe for the latest Apple leaks, news, and rumours every weekday at 12 UTC from iCave Dave. Thank you for watching.